I think this is depressing. It makes me sad. And I don't just mean Star Trek. I mean any franchise that's about big spaceships flying around the galaxy. And I don't find it depressing for the reason you might think. I don't look at this and say, well, I wish I could go on adventures around the galaxy. I wish this stuff existed in my lifetime instead of the future. I find it depressing because when you go to look up, well, when will we have something like this, interstellar travel, the answer is never. Allow me to explain. In any franchise like this, when they talk about how their ships work, it's always some kind of literal magic. It's a warp drive or hyperspace or wormholes. It all comes down to some kind of a magic portal that basically lets them skip the long distances. So they are effectively traveling many, many times the speed of light because they just go in here and pop out there. You need to understand that from a scientific perspective, this is no different from if in their engine room they just had a wizard with a magic wand. This is purely a plot convenience dreamed up by fiction writers. There is absolutely no scientific, theoretical framework for ever being able to transport a spaceship around the cosmos this way. This is not one of those things where you look at it and say, well, if we could produce enough energy, or if we had the right materials or the right technology, we could eventually do it. That's like if you were walking around at night with a small child and the child said, hey, I'm going to climb up in that tree and grab the moon and eat it. And if you tried to explain, well, the moon is actually very far away and very large, and they said, yeah, but one day I will get bigger and then I can do it. That kid has a lot of possibilities for what can happen in their life, many of them amazing, but that is not one of them. See, the issue is that because there are no shortcuts through space as there are in fiction, you have to find a way to cover those distances, and the distances are much greater than the average person understands. For example, right now we are trying to go to Mars. And Mars, when it is at its closest to Earth, is about 35 million miles. That's doable. At a cost of up to $500 billion per trip, $500 billion by some estimates. That's because this thing doesn't just need to fly for tens of millions of miles, but it needs to be able to keep the astronauts alive for years. Because of the way the orbits work, the trip back is longer than the trip there. So you need years worth of fuel, food, water, medical supplies. Not just everything that the crew needs, but everything they could conceivably need. Everything has to work perfectly for years without any opportunity to stop for repairs or resupply or refueling. It's cutting-edge technology that has to be tested relentlessly to make sure it will not fail during this entire time and that it can hold up to the unimaginable stresses of space. So let's imagine we do that, and I think we will. And we say, okay, now let's upgrade that to do interstellar travel to get to the next nearest star. What you're saying is we need to upgrade this thing so that it can make that $500 billion Mars trip 700,000 times in a row without stopping. And some of you have already done the math and said, well, now hold on, if it takes months to get to Mars, that would take tens of thousands of years to get to the next star. And you're right, at the speed this thing goes. To make that trip in a human lifetime, you need something that can go many thousands of times faster than this, meaning you need engines that are many thousands of times more powerful and that can carry many thousands of times more fuel. With even the most fantastic futuristic technology you can imagine, you still need a craft the size of a city because you have to bring everything. The people on here have to have everything they need to live for decades. The energy required to get this thing up to the speed you need it to go would be many, many more times than all of the energy ever produced on Earth combined. And I know what you're saying, you can't predict where technology is going to go. 200 years ago, they could not have conceived of something like an iPhone. That's true, but this also proves my point if you stop and think about it. The technologies you need to casually invent in your sci-fi to make interstellar travel possible, like the ability to produce a near infinite amount of energy from a tiny amount of fuel, or the ability to manufacture infinite food and water and medical supplies out of thin air. The last thing you would ever use them for is to travel to another star, because you're talking about technologies that would render life on Earth a utopian alien paradise beyond all imagination. For example, earlier when I was talking about the incomprehensible timescales, some of you were shouting at your phone saying, what about hypersleep and suspended animation? But think about what you just said. Look, to do this, all we need to do is to solve for human immortality, to find a technology that makes the human body not age. So what you're saying is that in order to make this possible, you simply need to get life on Earth to a stage where everyone is basically living as a god. When I talk about how disease outbreaks would eventually kill everybody, you would just say, well, yeah, but we wouldn't do this until we've solved disease. By the time we got to that point, there would be no reason to do this. If the issue is running out of room on Earth, we could build an orbiting megacity that could house 100 million people. That would be much, much easier than this. And if you say, but the natural instinct of humans is to go out and explore and to colonize other places, my answer would be that we actually have a planet very nearby that is very similar to Earth, but just has some very harsh conditions, and we've not bothered to colonize it yet. It's called Earth. Most of our surface is ocean, and we've not built cities on the ocean floor because why? Nobody wants to be trapped inside a tiny pressurized facility in a hostile environment cut off from everything. And the better and more comfortable life becomes on land, the less appealing that looks. This is fantasy in the same way that the Lord of the Rings is fantasy. It's just a mechanism for storytelling, for heroism and adventure. But we have no possible future that actually looks like this.